不是彼此的初恋，
初恋这种事儿多不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，布鲁蒂能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同质互联网公司。
This is Rich Jigga. He's a Chinese rapper by way of Indonesia, and he's very popular on the internet. This is Joji. He's a Japanese-Australian singer, and he's also very popular on the internet. Plus, Joji invented the Harlem Shake meme. Let me say that again. This guy, Joji, in the blood bathtub, invented the Harlem Shake meme. But we'll come back to that. So Rich and Joji are both signed to 88 Rising, an entertainment company hoping to build a lasting global brand that will outlive singular moments of virality. They primarily create content combining Asian culture and hip-hop, a formula that apparently pleases the internet gods greatly. They've only been around for 18 months, but they're already putting up major label numbers.
I think that we have an unprecedented collective of talent, a group of like predominantly Asian artists, you know, really like making waves globally, which from an independent point of view as well.
88's founder, Sean Miyashiro, cut his teeth launching Vice's electronic music channel, Thump. But quickly, Sean became interested in life beyond dance music.
I knew that after launching a whole content platform that I have kind of the ability and the know-how to do it again, but like for what was the question.
So Sean moved to the Bronx to start over and figure it out. He couldn't afford an office space, so he worked out of his car at the top of a grimy parking garage.
Everything kind of started here. If you look around, this is my environment. This is my serenity, really. 88 Rising was built here. Built on the grounds of LA Fitness, residence in a parking garage. I was living in the Bronx. I'm just like, damn, where the hell do I go? So I just come up here and I I just kind of figure things out every single day. Being like, okay, what the hell is this thing? Coming here was kind of like my own kind of private office, basically. Like, to be honest, I would even go to the bathroom here. I would like take pisses here, you know what I mean? Like, it was, it's just too far to go back down there. When I need Wi-Fi, I'd spend a good part of the day at Dunkin' Donuts. Hi, how are you? Can I get a chicken snack wrap?
Before 88 Rising officially launched, Sean caught a surprise break in the form of a Twitter friendship with a funny 16-year-old kid from Indonesia named Brian, who taught himself English by watching Rubik's Cube tutorial videos on YouTube. Seriously, that's true.
I thought his Twitter was genius, from the future, just crazy. And like just the shit that he was saying, like the memes he was making. But I didn't know that he rapped or anything like that. I really didn't. And he came up with that stick like 2 weeks later.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living and baby gon' smell blood trail every minute, bro.
Dat Stick was Brian's first ever attempt at making a rap song, and it immediately went viral.
Everything was great about it. But the one thing that I noticed is the song was hard as hell. Just like everything about it, man. Just like, it was menacing, bro.
Soon after the video dropped, Brian signed with 88 Rising.
I'll FaceTime with Rich. Sorry for calling you Rich Chiga on my phone, Rich. Brian, he gets like super pissed off that he's saved in my phone as Rich Chiga. He's like, dude, am I not a human to you? What's good, bro?
What's good, brother?
How you doing?
Doing great. I did the sound check.
How was it?
It was tight.
But you've been a bitch sucking thick cock.
So, Brian could definitely rap, but some viewers understandably took offense at a Chinese kid satirizing rap cliches and calling himself Rich Chiga. But if a group of well-known rappers saw the video and genuinely liked it, that could at least help validate Brian as a legit hip-hop artist. Plus, it could be really funny.
It was just kind of an idea that I just had on the spot. Everything that rappers say is better and funnier and smarter and wittier. You know, it's just more entertaining. We just edited it as tight as possible, put it up, and it really worked.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living and
Yo, this nigga got a pouch on and a Reebok pouch.
This is the hardest nigga of all time.
He said, when you come for a chigga like me. That was dope.
Like, it's just lit, and I think people would take it as a joke at first, but it's like if he ran with that and kept doing more videos like that, it's just lit.
You know, I'd never been to America before, and like all of a sudden, just like I see like all the rappers that I listen to just like reacting to my stuff, and I was like, what? How did this happen?
The reaction video also went viral and even led to a remix of Dat Stick featuring Wu-Tang's Ghostface.
I'll get on that track. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Really, on the remix?
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
And yeah, the remix went viral too. Brian has since acknowledged the misstep in his name and claims he may change it. But for the time being, he's still Rich Chigga to his fans. An ever-growing global audience, hungry for more releases from emerging talent around the world.
I didn't know that it was gonna be this impactful and this important to people, and I'm very thankful and blessed that it has. And every day now that I wake up, it's like it's just like a new mission every day.
A major part of that mission involves Joji. Remember the bloody bath guy? He's a former YouTube personality in the middle of a career transition.
The sound of this song, Will He, it's like a trap song that you can like slow dance to. Awkward prom shit, you know what I mean? I used to do crazy episodic internet videos. It was going well, and one day it was me and a few friends just in a room. We were casually chilling, and then someone plays the song, and it's brand new at the time. I happened to have a lot of costumes laying around, so I told the other guys, I was like, get in these costumes and let's just dance to it. Like, who cares? We were like, okay, let's just go crazy at the drop. So that video goes up. I go to sleep, and the next morning, everyone's doing it. Like, next morning. That taught me a lot about the internet, how people want to just be a part of something. And from that point on, something changed, and I was a little better at understanding demographics and people and, what they want to see and what they want to hear. I was friends with a couple other artists who were affiliated with 88, and then I also started to realize that 88 is the bridge between Western and Asian entertainment, and I really wanted to be a part of that.
Joji just released the In Tongues EP, his first project as a serious artist.
Joji's In Tongues record came out a couple weeks ago. It's #2 on Billboard on the R&B charts, which is crazy for, independent release, and he's like a brand new artist.
And the success is even more impressive, knowing he went from creating something like this,
it's just Taco Bell, what could possibly go wrong?
to creating something Tonight, Rich Chigga has a show in New York City. Tickets sold out in an hour.
I came here, I'm first online. I was here at 1.
I was the third person online.
So why'd you get here so early?
Because I want to see Rich Chigga.
I want to touch him.
What do you guys think of Joji?
Oh my God!
That's my dad, son.
You guys copped the new EP or like?
Yeah. I woke up at 6 in the morning just to cop that shit. And then I listened to it, and that shit started making me cry.
This is actually kind of exciting. Every time, this never gets old. Like, you live online and social media, but like, there's nothing like just being with the people.
More often than not, viral success happens by accident. And then after an appearance on Ellen or Jimmy Kimmel, the creator's star power fizzles out. But Idiot Rising has figured out how to turn potential gimmicks into brands with an actual following that keeps coming back for the next thing.
Oh, shit.
So keep an eye out for Idiot's next move. But more than likely, it won't be covered on network television or terrestrial radio. Although, as they've already proven, nowadays that really doesn't matter.
Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers, touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the connected rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product, and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off, and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially, it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle, you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example, I see my products. I select a coat, and that's tried it, and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate, and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards? Yes, please. How about there? First time we came out with B, Jade said, "It feels like I've been released from prison." Do you want these, Mrs.?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right. Yeah. And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
Hi, it's
Jade.
Jade.
Oh.
So you can talk to Jade through this. Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya. When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time.
Yeah, my love.
A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am, I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people would probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in the house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of them. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do.
Was that? Good.
It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. Today's the first day that I've been in school via B, and so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's going fairly well. And it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well, and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures, whereas today I've been able to do all of the work. I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there, and if I can't do something, she can. And if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.
debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
The cubicle represents a tyranny, but it confines your imagination, your thoughts, into a small physical area. Imagine pretty much every software engineer or finance person being able to, disconnect from their desk and look at holographic monitors on a beach and doing their work from there. That's not going to be science fiction. It's the modern office place.
Silicon Valley is all about building the future. A startup called Meta thinks it's getting there first, thanks to a big bet that it's made on augmented reality.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to Meta.
Thank you.
Call it a 360-degree office where you can spatialize your thoughts as part of your workflow for education, architecture, design, engineering, etc.
People often mix up augmented reality with virtual reality. VR totally blocks your ability to see or hear the real world. AR overlays holograms onto what you already see. Meta has tried to make its version of the workspace feel familiar.
You grab the hologram instead of using a controller or a mouse, and your brain already knows how to do it. In other words, we've designed an operating system that humanity has always known how to use. So you can see this eyeball, which is, by the way, photorealistic. You can see my hand is occluding the eyeball, and now the eyeball is occluding my hand, right? You see those two circles? They get small, and then they turn into this glowing white ball, and then I can move my hand around supernaturally. I can do this with two hands and rotate the thing. I can stretch it. I can throw it back right into the shelving system, and that's all you have to learn to become a modern worker.
And to prove this, the employees at Meta have started to get rid of their computer monitors, trading them in for Meta's augmented reality headsets. Myron thinks that in less than a decade, we'll all be just wearing strips of glass that can
In the 80s, everybody had computers on their desktop, but no one was using them because they had a lot of work to do. So they were still using typewriters. And at some point, the CEO took all the typewriters away and everybody was forced to use their computers. So it's very exciting to see a new generation of technology, a new paradigm.
I consider us like pioneers in the holographic wild. I'm pulling up my browser with my hands and sending out emails to colleagues and just kind of really acclimating to the new environment.
Now you're putting on my computer, essentially. Our digital lives live on our phones. We have all of our pictures and notes and all these kinds of things. So, and why don't you write yourself a little sticky note? I like it. And go ahead and just take your fist right over the top of the sticky note and close your fist. And now...
Oh, what? Meta's own transition to augmented reality has run into plenty of unexpected problems. And it's still going to be a while before you'll start to see these devices in your office. But I think it's a future worth waiting for.
If we could see these holograms between us, we will have been able to share our work with one another more naturally, more efficiently, and more productively than ever before. Humanity will have evolved slightly.
This is Hatsune Miku, Japan's sensational virtual pop star. She's released over 100,000 songs in multiple languages and performed sold-out concerts around the world. Her image has appeared in games, on TV, in car races, and is even etched on the side of a Japanese space rocket.
I came for Hatsune Miku, Carlos.
She's Lady Gaga's favorite digital pop star and opened shows for her in the US 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of fans attended her exhibition and live shows near Tokyo recently.
理想のアイドルっていうとどの曲でもミクはすごい綺麗に歌ってくれる。
他没有缺点啊，没有任何让我们感到不开心的一些新闻。
She's everything to everybody. That's probably why she's so popular.
Miku's creator Hiroyuki Ito and his Sapporo-based company have been developing the virtual diva for over 10 years.
初音ミクとはキャラクターとしてすごくYouTube とかで検索するとたくさんの初音ミクが出てくるんですけども、元々の初音ミクのその原点は歌声を合成するソフトウェアなんです。
Both the software and character are named Hatsune Miku, meaning the first sound of the future. Originally based on Yamaha's Vocaloid technology, Miku the software has a sound bank containing voice samples and a huge array of tools. You input the melody and lyrics, then Miku the character sings them. To date, Krypton has sold 120,000 software licenses at $200 each to fans around the world who use it to create numerous songs and share them online. Some of the fan-created songs are chosen to be part of Miku's concerts, for which they're paid a royalty fee.
もともと初音ミクっていうその存在自体がそのボトムアップって言いますか、中にはアマチュアクリエイターじゃなくて今もうすでにプロになって活躍している方もいらっしゃるんですけども。
The company also has other revenue streams. It makes money from merchandising, licensing deals, and concert ticket sales. According to the real-life musicians who perform with Hatsune Miku, the virtual pop star is interesting and surprising.
今年で3年ぐらい、ちょうど3年ぐらいやってきて、ライブも数十本、数百本やったので、そういうことが演奏によって起こせるためのそういう器みたいな感じになってます。初音ミクらしさって僕はあんまりない。初音ミクって何だってありっていうか。
For Ito, Miku has the potential to change the way we think about music.
そういう新しいそのテクノロジーによって新しい音楽のあり方っていうものを模索していきたいと思っていました。
And for her fans, it goes even further.
ミクって魂がないので、だからみんな魂を作り上げるために存在している。
Now, there are a lot of fitness gadgets out there. In my quest to get fit, I tested 17 of them over the last few months. At least one personal trainer I know was a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I've been watching these new technologies come to the market for almost as long as I've been a personal trainer. They're just tricks and tropes. They're not much different than the BowFlex machines or, to be honest, the original Jane Fonda workout video.
But some of these gadgets that are just coming to the market do so much more than what they used to do, just tracking your activities. Out of all of them, this chest strap was my favorite. It comes with a robot coach that points to the future, one where you might not need a human trainer at all. And it works like this. You wear the chest strap so that it can read your heart rate, and that connects to Move's free app that talks to you.
Welcome to Move Heart Rate Hit Outdoor Running. Let's get moving and warm up in Zone 2.
Move's computerized coach tells you what to do at that exact moment, whether you're running outside or you're doing body weight exercises indoors.
Swing your arms faster to get your legs moving quicker. Let's crush this round.
And by reading your heart rate, she knows exactly how hard you're working. She keeps you honest.
Way to go, you are in the target zone. Keep pushing, you're almost at the end of the round. Don't give up.
I've been running for 7 years now, and my biggest problem is that I never push myself hard enough. I end up going on the same slow, comfortable 30-minute jog, but the Move HR Burn blasted me out of that rut. By the end of these half-hour exercises, I was drenched in sweat in a way that I never am when I work out alone. Training with a real person is great, whether that's your group instructor or your coach or your personal trainer. But humans, they're expensive. For the rest of us, this $60 gadget is all you need.
what does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning, who used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped at the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
to expose everything you won't admit. And action. This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like, love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh.
But to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What if everyone it's a girl, Superwoman? I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time.
My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea.
Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone.
Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada, was like, Canada, is your daughter making videos? And my mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're going to go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and then have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010, and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms, and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad, and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe, and my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make fun of me, and that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, Indian. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos.
Oi, Lily, wear the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone?
They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool.
Your dress is short. Don't know what for.
And we're pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman.
What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman.
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about, like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name. Maybe this should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She starred in a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views and the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
energy is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime. You know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, I mean, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook Paramount or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to this island, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution because we know that the more life that is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forests on the land that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission: track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sails to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, e-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
And of course, on Feds Decides, we need to make the trek to the analysis of Michael McKee, and we'll do that here in a moment. After that, we've got wonderful conversation with guests that folds into economics, into finance, and into investment as well. Again, the Dow negative 153. And now, let us go to Michael McKee as the Fed decides.
Well, Tom, there is no change in rates, but there is a change in when they might rise. The Fed now sees the first rate move in 2023, pulling it forward. The dot plot changes. 13 of the 18 members of the Open Market Committee now see a move in 2023. In March, there were only 7. The average rate they see is 0.625%, which would suggest just one rate move, a range probably from 25 to 50 basis points with the possibility of another. And it also looks like they see 2 people see it at 1.75% and 2 at 1.25, so it could move if inflation continues to move. Now, the statement has very few changes in it, and it does not change the language on inflation. They say inflation has risen, largely reflecting temporary factors, and they keep the line about inflation running persistently below 2%. But they do change the outlook for inflation and for growth in 2021. Instead of inflation at 2.4%, which is what they saw in March, they now see it at 3.4%. The core rate goes from 2.2% to 3%, and they expect it to drop back, both of those to drop back to 2 and 2.1% by 2022. GDP this year is going to be 7%, the Fed says. In March, they thought 6.5%. The unemployment rate unchanged at 4.5%. The assessment of the economy is pretty much word for word the same, except the Fed does note that progress on vaccinations will likely continue to reduce the effects of the public health crisis on the economy, but risks to the economic outlook remain. And one last thing, they announced the extension of their temporary U.S. dollar liquidity swap lines with 9 other central banks through the end of the year, but there is no word on administered rates at this point.
We are well rehearsed here, and we're going to have to go to Michael McKee on the level of surprise here. But Romain Bostic, I'm going to have you dive in here. What do we do, Romain? Do we go down 1,000 points to start the afternoon?
I don't know if we go down 1,000 points, but that sound you hear is a lot of people reopening their Excel spreadsheets here and recalculating, I think, what goes forward here. You saw an immediate knee-jerk reaction in all of the major equity indices, S&P 500 around the lows of the day, as are a lot of those cyclical names that had gotten bid pretty higher. Those are leading the market pretty lower here. You're also starting to see a lot of softness come into the market with regards to gold, precious metals, as well as some of the other commodities as well. Oil pretty much flat on the day. And of course, Lisa, we did see a nice little pop there in that 10-year yield, 152. Yeah.
For John Farrell, we got to quote the Dow Jones.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average. There you go. I forgot. 34,022. Should I give you the actual cash price for futures?
No. I want the cash price down 300 points.
All right, moving on.
So much for that.
We got to check
Lisa,
on
we got to move on and talk about the real yield here. You take the 10-year yield and whatever the dot plots and Michael McKee's inflation expectation is, and I'm looking at a negative 0.90. That hasn't moved much, has it?
Which is actually the interesting part. That is exactly what I wanted to hone in on. Yes, we're seeing a lift to the 10-year yield right now. It is not as big as you would expect, given the fact that they're projecting 2 rate hikes in 2023, as opposed to really beginning that liftoff cycle in 2024. The lack of market action, I would argue, Tom, is highly notable given the surprise factor, with so many people expecting the Fed to keep the language the same.
Michael McKee with us before the press conference. We always know he tries to get the first question and ends up with the last question. Maybe if he takes his coat off like President Biden at a presser, he'll do better. Mike McKee, what is the level of McKee's surprise here?
I'm a little surprised by the fact that so many Fed officials changed their view for 2023. Obviously, the consensus seems to be that the economy is recovering much more quickly and that growth and inflation are going to be higher, and that maybe means they need to act sooner. Although they're still very cautious, a large group did move. We thought there might be 1 or 2. Instead, 6 additional Fed officials switched to 2023 for a rate increase. And so there does seem to be a consensus that they may have to move sooner rather than later.
Scott Minerd with us this morning as well, with Guggenheim, I should say this afternoon. Sorry, Scott, I'm on surveillance time here. Is, well, always an important voice, and the market's moving here so importantly. The nuanced Lisa Abramowitz of this Fed is so important. We're going to go Bitcoin free with Minerd this afternoon.
Really? You're going to guarantee that? I don't know. I think that we should perhaps ask him about that. I think that we might not be able to make that guarantee, Scott. I do want to ask you, though, about the lack of response that we're seeing in markets. The idea here that we got a surprise. The Fed is going to signal perhaps that they're going to start tapering sooner than some people expected in order to get to that rate hiking cycle in 2023. Why is the market so sanguine about this right now?
Well, look, I think that my feeling was that if we got something that sounded hawkish today, that there's a very good chance that the bond market will believe that the Federal Reserve is trying to stay ahead of the curve on inflation, and therefore there would be limited pressure upward in rates, and so it might be a buying opportunity. Now, right now, if you look at the charts, you'll see that we're still below 155 area, which is where we broke down in yields. And the downtrend that's been in place ever since the beginning, sometime in March, whatever time that was, is still solidly in place. And I'll add one last thing is people have been fighting this rally for months, and basically it's the pain trade. And so I don't see any reason to take hawkish news, as you might say today, as anything but positive for the bond market.
When you look at this statement, though, Scott, do you get a sense at all that maybe the Fed has changed their positioning on how much inflation they're willing to tolerate?
You know, I don't think so. I think that they're obviously betting strongly on the transient argument. Our own work shows that, today where we have, PCE or core PCE, I think somewhere around 3.4 year over year, that by the time we get to this time next year or close to this, that core PCE on a year-over-year basis will be 1.6% once you get these one-time shocks for like cars and airfares and hotels out of the way. And so, and I think they can do the same calculation that I can do. But it is a little surprising to me, and I agree with Mike, that there were that many people and that would want to think that we're going to raise rates in 2023 and the degree to which they were committed to it.
Scott Miner with us. We welcome all of you. The Fed Decides on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg Television worldwide. Romaine Bostick for John Farrow. Thrilled that Lisa Bramlett's with us this afternoon as we look at some of the challenges here of the Fed in conversation with Ms. Minard, Mr. Minard. Ms. Swank will show up. Diane Swank will show up here in a bit. Some other good guests. Neela Richardson scheduled to be with us later on. Michael McKee scheduled to be with us right now before he wanders into the press conference. Michael, how does this decision change your question to Jerome Powell?
Well, it depends on whether I'm last again, but if I'm first, I'm going to be asking him why the move in 2023. Does the Fed see a sense of urgency in tapering that it goes along with moving forward when they would raise rates? And so does that change their thinking about tapering? One issue that they have is that they've promised this long runway to investors, a lot of notice before they begin tapering. Does that shorten now? Do people have to prepare for perhaps a different world?
Scott Minard of Guggenheim, is this realistic for the Fed to start tapering and get down to $0 per month of bond purchases ahead of 2023 in order to raise rates twice without disrupting markets enough to stymie the economic recovery enough to stop them in their tracks?
Well, it's interesting, and I got to give Mike a lot of credit for that last press conference. It did befuddle the chairman, and I have it here in front of me to reread.
Oh, here we go.
Let me go through my analysis. Let me go through my analysis. They told us they weren't even thinking about it. So the best we're going to get at this press conference is they're going to start thinking about it. Our next meeting, they're going to be thinking about it. The earliest we're going to get an announcement is probably September on tapering, and then based on history, we shouldn't expect any real action until we get into the late first quarter or to the this early second quarter of next year, and then it'll probably take them about a year to taper. So they won't even get done with their tapering until early 2023. And then history shows us that they typically wait quite a while before they start raising rates. So if they're going to be true to their word, and I think they're really trying to be true to their word, but as much as they can be as vague as possible, the reality is that's the timeline they sketched out, and any change to that is just going to be perceived as hawkish.
All right, so then we go forward here. There's a communication issue here, Scott, that I think caught a lot of people off guard here. The general idea is people were expecting maybe the Fed to move a little bit sooner than I guess some of that 2024 pricing that we had earlier this year here. When Powell comes up to the stage here in about 20 minutes time here, what more can he say in your mind here that would actually maybe calm some of the nerves about what the plan is?
I think that if he sticks to his rhetoric, which is this vague communication where he to be quite frank, when you read the answer that Mike received in his last press conference, there was a lot of stumbling around when it came to asset purchases, and a lot of phrases like, the last time, this is, you kind of know what we did the last, right? I think that he's going to attempt to pull that off, and if he doesn't do that, and then he fumbles this, then we could see the market sell off. But I don't really think the chair will really say anything except make vague allusions to the possibility at some point after they've been thinking about it, that they're going to make a decision and actually start to move.
Scott, this is Mike. I don't usually get to ask this, but I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were me and you were in the news conference, what do you want to know from the chairman? And when I say that, I ask advisedly that you ask him something that you know he'll answer instead of just saying transitory.
Well, I think the number one question you really want the answer to is what is substantial further progress, right? Mm-hmm. And what I hear, he talks now about a 3-part test. And what I'm basically hearing is that we're going to push unemployment rates to a level where the differential between various groups of workers is much narrower than it was in the past. And Mike, I just read a white paper from the NBER from 1995, and they were discussing the policy in the Kennedy administration. They believed that the frictional rate or full employment was at 0. So, are they willing to risk inflation rates that are above 2% to get to a level that satisfies these other tests?
Yeah, that's a really, really important question. What we're going to do is let Michael McKee go. He's got to recalibrate after this. It was not a snooze fest. This is an important moment with the Dow down 217 points. Romain, very quickly here, you're looking at those big stocks nobody owns except I don't own them. I'm the only one in the country that doesn't own them. Yeah. What are the FANGs doing real quick?
They're down on the day. A lot of those stocks, of course, had gotten a nice little bid over the last couple of days. Microsoft down about 1%. New York FANG Index was higher on the day, now in the red, but going in the opposite direction, Tom. You got bank stocks getting a nice little bid. They came into today lower. They're now pushing higher with the exception of Citigroup, but that's a little bit more of an idiosyncratic story.
Okay, idiosyncratic. That's an afternoon game that we play here on the close. This is going to be really interesting, folks. I thought this was going to be boring.
Nope.
And it is not. Scott Minerd, what does this mean for American Wall Street? I mean, it is somewhat of a sea change. We're seeing it in market response. How does the calculus for Wall Street into the summer, into the end of the year as they replan budgets for next year, what changes today?
Well, I think, look, this is going to put, if he validates the idea that there's a possibility they're going to move earlier, he's going to have a lot of pressure coming out of Treasury, and that the economy needs to keep going. I think the other important factor would relate to the fact that if people start to believe the Fed is moving early, then we've got a repricing of the stock market ahead. And Tom, as you're aware, we're in the second year of an expansion. The average decline based on Ned Davis work is that we should expect an 18% pullback. So I think we're in a really vulnerable period here for stocks. And I think between here and when the Dodgers win the World Series in October,
you're killing me. Come on. You do this. Can the staff make a moment? A note here. The Padres are 2-8. The Dodgers are crushing them. But this is Minerd's last show. Scott Minerd, go away. Thank you so much. With Guggenheim, their global CIO this morning. Never again are you coming on. We will see you. Romain, you have 4 or 5 boards. And actually, folks, from the Snooze Fest, we go to board number 2. I feel like let's make a deal.
Yeah, we'll
Romain, board number 2 is pretty good.
Board number 2, you can put my White Sox AL Central leaders up there in a second here. But let's take a look what's happening here, because I can know whatever the opposite of Goldilocks is, this might actually be what's starting to unfold. At least right now, you're seeing a lot of those cyclical stocks get sold off. You're seeing a lot of those big cap tech stocks get sold off. The only thing really getting bid right now are some of those bank names. You're seeing a modest spike here in volatility. The VIX right now camped out at around 18, and there's your 30-year yield if you want to go a little bit further out onto the curve right now, hanging out, Tom, at around 2.2.
This is Lisa Bramwitz's wheelhouse, folks. Yeah. Long before I knew how to spell Lisa, L-I-S-A, she was one of our bond aces, and we had a banner go across Lisa measuring the difference in yield between the 5-year and the 30-year flat back to where they were ages ago. I mean, that's a big deal, right?
Well, and actually, if you take a look at the gap between 10-year and 5-year Treasury yields, it is actually contracted significantly. What this is, just to put it into plain English, people are starting to sniff out a policy error here. The Fed Fed raising rates faster than perhaps the economy can handle to go at the speed that they previously had priced in. And so you're going to see longer term rates come back in once growth slows that much more as the Fed moves away from their accommodation. Tom, this I am watching very closely. It has big implications in the economy, and really it could influence whether the Fed goes ahead with the projections that it has in the dot plot.
It is the Fed decides on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. It was to be a calm meeting, and as Michael McKee said into the press conference, it is anything but the Dow negative 300, 0.8% move. NASDAQ, there's S&P. I sound like I'm President Biden. I'm not that old. The NASDAQ down 1% right now as well. The VIX is out a full one figure, 18.35, showing some of the equity dynamics. We should note in Geneva, President Biden is getting ready to move out on Air Force One, back no doubt to the fun of Washington. Right now, it is our great honor to speak with Diane Swonk of Grant Thornton and their chief economist. And the thing that is so lovely about Diane Swonk is the pulse of what goods and service sector GDP is. Diane, what an interesting meeting all of a sudden. And the backdrop is a boom American economy. What is the Grant Thornton call on how this economy looks as Jerome Powell prosecutes Fed policy through the rest of this year?
It's a boom economy. I mean, we had the strongest economic growth in our forecast in the last cut since the 1950s. Let that set in, 70 years. That's really stunning. It's a tenth on whether or not it's 1984 or the 1950s, but, you know, we're talking about a boom economy. Even as things slow down a bit in the second half of the year and you go into the strongest quarter of the year will be the second quarter, which we're coming to an end to now. But I think it's really important that the Fed is responding to exactly what it said it would, and that is the data as it comes in. Inflation and the flare in inflation has come in much stronger than they thought. And I disagree a little bit with Scott, although I love Scott. And, you know, I think, you know, I call it Art for Roger when Jay gets up there and talks about, you know, in terms of not committing to quantitative easing and what are they going to do with QE in terms of the tapering. But I think it is important to understand that they've acknowledged now that the economy's come in hotter, it's coming faster. What Jay will be doing is also saying, but employment is a disappointment. And how does the Fed look at that? And I think you're going to hear him talking about we're uncertain about things like retirements and that. And I also think it's important for the Fed to, you know, think about in terms of moving this up. I was surprised by the number that moved up to 2023 as well. And I think Lisa really hit the nail on the head when she was talking about what are the risks that we see a sooner pullback, and the Fed could precipitate a mistake that ends up in a recession after a boom. Well, Diane, and I think that's something we do have to think about.
Since you liked what Lisa said and not what I said, Lisa, why don't you quiz Ms. Swonk here about the path forward?
Well, that's what I was going to ask, basically, Diane. What is the potential implication if the Fed were to go through with what is projected in the dots, if they were to raise rates twice by 2023, which implies a removal of the bond purchases on a monthly basis? Do you think that the economy would be strong enough to keep going? Do you think that this would be a smart move based on the trajectory of growth?
Well, actually, I already had that in my forecast, so my simulations suggest we can get through that. That said, it could be much more rapid as the inflation numbers continue. And I think what Jay Powell really has to start to get to deal with is what does the Fed actually consider transitory? And one of the things we're concerned about is that there is a big transitory piece of this. We know the base effects start to play out as we get into the summer. That's the effects of things falling in price, you know, during the height of the crisis. But the other part of this and the other shoe to drop is things like the components of shelter inflation, which is over a third of the CPI. That's going to start to heat up. That did decelerate quite sharply as rents fell in inner city districts and urban areas. That is going to pick up, and you're going to see some of the housing market increases we've seen. Actually, single family housing rents have picked up quite dramatically. All of that's going to show up. It's not going to necessarily make the economy really hot, but the Fed's going to have a much easier time hitting their 2% or a little above target. And I think this is consistent with that.
Romaine Bostic, S&P 500 finds new lows off of this important announcement.
Yeah, lows of the day right now for most equities. Of course, highs of the day right now on yields. Lows of the day with regards to some of those metals. Gold are really taking it hard here, Tom. And you talk about the dollar, something we haven't talked about here. We should point out that the Dixie and the BB Dixie up about 0.6% and well above some of those key moving averages, Lisa.
And I show Euro 120.41 on Euro breaking down as well. Really, you know, okay, folks, all the people say boring, boring, boring. Lisa, this is not boring, is it?
No, and honestly, a lot of people expected this to be pivotal, this to be one of the most important press conferences ever out of the Federal Reserve. It's a pivot point for them, trying to recognize the strength in markets and the strength in the economy, while also treading carefully in an economy that has had slow growth for so long. Diane, do you think the Fed ever could remove accommodation without disrupting markets? Is this par for the course? And frankly, is this what the Fed ought to be doing based on the financial risks that are building?
I actually think so. So, you know, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's no way. These markets are so used to, when Scott laid out, you know, well, this is the length of time we look at in the history. Nothing about history is really informative about where we're at today. We're talking about breaking historic norms. We're in uncharted waters, and the Fed has to acknowledge that. With that said, they're ready to pivot. This is a pivotal meeting, but they have to say, we see. This is more inflation than we thought, and some of it is transitory. We don't know how much is persistent given what we're seeing in wages. And we don't want to make a policy mistake by allowing inflation to get more entrenched. We also don't want to overshoot, and the point you made, and that is to precipitate a recession. And I think the risk is that historically, if we really want to think about the Fed, ultimately this agreement on average inflation targeting, which, you know, not including this year sort of, it looks like they're including this year now on the average inflation targeting. And I think that's important. And I think also, you know, it really is just an agreement. It's not a rule that they're living by, and it's a loose agreement. It's a guideline, you know, as my friends in other countries say about some of the rules that they follow on the road. They don't follow all the rules of the road. And I think that's really important, is this is only dependent on how people interpret around the table. And the Fed has ultimately always been more concerned about inflation than employment.
Well said. I was just point out here for our viewers and listeners that full Fed hike now being priced into the end of 2022, at least when you look at euro-dollar futures. Of course, it was already ahead of the game, of course, in late 2023, even before we got the announcement today, Tom. Diane, I am curious about the employment component here, because there are a lot of critics who would point to the 6-7 million jobs that were still in the hole here and say, whatever happened to getting back to full employment? Is that still not part of the equation, or is it part of the equation and the Fed just thinks we'll get there quicker?
Oh, I think it's part of the equation. I mean, the Fed's not going to be raising rates until we get back to full employment. And full employment, the question is, do we count those 2.6 million workers we think have retired out? That changes the equation on what full employment is. We are going, it looks like there's a speed limit on employment gains that the Fed had hoped to get million in, million out. We expect to see the economy get back to full employment sometime in late 2022. That still gives us rate hikes in 2023, and that's what the Fed is expecting.
Diane, do you believe in the boom of the service sector, that we've had this good producing consumption moment, and we're going to rotate right over to a service sector boom, and we're going to get a pretty good Q3 and even a pretty good Q4? Jan Hatzius at Goldman Sachs stunned me today when he talked about a sub 3% American economy out there somewhere. Which is it?
Well, it is out there. It's a little further out for that. But I do think we do have a strong consumer pivot going on already. We know from the retail sales data yesterday the slowness in goods consumption, but the move into the kinds of things we weren't buying, clothing and shoes and makeup and, you know, spending at restaurants in full force. In fact, in inflation-adjusted terms, even though we're still way down in employment at restaurants, we've really seen consolidation in the sector downscale with the big food chains, and that has meant that and real spending has actually exceeded its previous peak hit in February of 2020. So you really do see that pivot going on. Consumers are going out to see and be seen at this point in time, and spending is reflecting that. The question is, how quickly do we slow down? And, we have a very weak second half of 2022. 2022, without an additional infrastructure package, even with it, because it's spread out through 8 years, you had a fiscal cliff in the beginning of 2022. You really got to have, the economy's got to have some momentum there. And it does have some. But that's one of the reasons why he's looking at those slower rates, because as you get in the second half of 2022, you can have slower rates if you've already absorbed a lot of the people who are in the labor market and those who want to be employed, then you still get a situation where the Fed can raise rates in 2023.
Diane Swonk, thank you so much for being with us today. Greatly appreciate it with our Michigan economics. Greatly appreciate it today. We need to reset. President Biden is in Geneva, ready to board Air Force One. I see our Jennifer Jacobs standing dutifully by, no doubt to ask a rude question. That story continues and will be greeted back in the nation. This is somewhat of a regime shift here in the markets. Lisa, I want to talk to you with a banner, and I really want to talk to you, Lisa, off the banner of the 2-year yield, where finally it moves.
Yeah, this is actually exactly what I'm looking at right now. Just looking at the 2-year yield, it's now the highest since June of 2020. It was up the most since April, if you look at it on an intraday basis. Basically, this highlights the surprise to markets, the idea here that we do get some kind of bringing forward of the rate hiking expectations. I do think it's interesting to see yields in the 10-year continuing to creep higher as people continue to digest this. Fascinating to me how they really actually surprised markets, and they're digesting that.
Romain, digest this for the close. I mean, we got to go through the Fed meeting, and then you've got to reset for the close of the market. And what's it mean for equities?
Well, actually, and we should point out too, in some of the more recent Fed meetings that we haven't actually seen the reaction come off the release. We've seen the market reaction come off the commentary by Powell, his response to the questions here. So it'll be interesting to see, after we get such a severe knee-jerk reaction off of that statement, what Powell can say to either reverse the tide or maybe even make things worse. But right now, this is a market that is actually, believe it or not, even though it's down, is actually pricing in relatively improving economic conditions, but they're also pricing in the idea here that the accommodation from the Fed is going to be pulled back a little bit sooner than expected.
Romain, do you assume that equity strategists will have to just completely reset after this meeting?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's possible they could, Tom.
I find it absolutely fascinating. Lisa, on the bond market, let's finish up with that before we go to the comments of a chairman of the Federal Reserve. And I got to go, Lisa, in further. I need to go in for radio. This is such a sight to see. The belly of the curve. And if I go into the belly of the curve, I look at the 5-year real yield. Doug, watch it, Romain. You've got the belly of the curve going too. Lisa, I go into the 5-year real yield, and I'm sorry, it's movable versus the 10-year.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm looking at all the way that the market is digesting this, and at first it really took it in stride. But as we continue, you could see people realizing, wait a second, this means the Fed isn't going to be buying as many bonds. And if you look at that real yield on the 5-year, the real yield is negative 1.6%. Oh my God, it's climbed all the way up from a low of negative 1.95%. I mean, it's sort of amazing, Tom, where we are here. Just to put this into perspective, with inflation so high and the way that the Fed has just sat on the front of the curve, perhaps until now.
We're beginning to get research notes in, a few for you right now. Capital economics, always good and very, very precise. Fed sticking to transitory view, but factors in rate hikes as well. Here's what we're going to do. Romain Bostigan for John Farrow with Lisa Abramowitz. I'm Tom Keene here on the radio and television of this Fed Decides. What was going to be a Monday meeting has become much more than a Monday meeting, with the Dow negative 280, SPX down 28 points. The VIX a little bit of quiet in the equity market after the shock.
You see that 10-year real yield, Tom?
Yeah, the 10-year real yield has come, it's finally coming in from negative 0.90 into negative 0.83. So that's a move there as well. All of a sudden, each question has a value. It will be interesting to see. He's not as timely as Madame Lagarde is, but the shot's a lot better. I mean, Madame Lagarde's cameras are set back in Luxembourg from Frankfurt or wherever, where with Mr. Powell, it's more immediate. Our Michael McKee in the room with the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
At the Federal Reserve, we are strongly committed to achieving the monetary policy goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment and price stability. Today, the Federal Open Market Committee kept interest rates near zero and maintained our asset purchases. These measures, along with our strong guidance on interest rates and on our balance sheet, will ensure that monetary policy will continue to deliver powerful support to the economy until the recovery is complete. Widespread vaccinations, along with unprecedented fiscal policy actions, are also providing strong support to the recovery. Indicators of economic activity and employment have continued to strengthen, and real GDP this year appears to be on track to post its fastest rate of increase in decades. Much of this rapid growth reflects the continued bounce back in activity from depressed levels. The sectors most adversely affected by the pandemic remain weak, but have shown improvement. Household spending is rising at a rapid pace, boosted by the ongoing reopening of the economy, fiscal support, and accommodative financial conditions. The housing sector is strong, and business investment is increasing at a solid pace. In some industries, near-term supply constraints are restraining activity. Forecasts from FOMC participants for economic growth this year have been revised up since our March summary of economic projections. Even so, the recovery is incomplete, and risks to the economic outlook remain. As with overall economic activity, conditions in the labor market have continued to improve, although the pace of improvement has been uneven. Employment rose 419,000 per month on average in April and May, with the leisure and hospitality sector continuing to post notable gains. Employment in this sector and the economy as a whole remains well below pre-pandemic levels. The unemployment rate remained elevated in May at 5.8%, and this figure understates the shortfall in employment, particularly as participation in the labor market has not moved up from the low rates that have prevailed for most of the past year. Factors related to the pandemic, such as caregiving needs, ongoing fears of the virus, and unemployment insurance payments, appear to be weighing on employment growth. These factors should wane in coming months against a backdrop of rising vaccinations, leading to more rapid gains in employment. Looking ahead, FOMC participants project the labor market to continue to improve, with the median projection for the unemployment rate standing at 4.5% at the end of this year and declining to 3.5% by the end of 2023. The economic downturn has not fallen equally on all Americans, and those least able to shoulder the burden have been hardest hit. In particular, despite progress, joblessness continues to fall disproportionately on lower-wage workers in the service sector and on African Americans and Hispanics. Inflation has increased notably in recent months. The 12-month change in PCE prices was 3.6% in April and will likely remain elevated in coming months before moderating. Part of the increase reflects the very low readings from early in the pandemic falling out of the calculation, as well as the pass-through of past increases in oil prices to consumer energy prices. Beyond these effects, we are also seeing upward pressure on prices from the rebound in spending as the economy continues to reopen, particularly as supply bottlenecks have limited how quickly production in some sectors can respond in the near term. These bottleneck effects have been larger than anticipated, and FOMC participants have revised up their projections for inflation, notably for this year. As these transitory supply effects abate, inflation is expected to drop back toward our longer-run goal, and the median inflation projection falls from 3.4% this year to 2.1% next year and 2.2% in 2023. The process of reopening the economy is unprecedented, as was the shutdown at the onset of the pandemic. As the reopening continues, shifts in demand can be large and rapid, and bottlenecks, hiring difficulties, and other constraints could continue to limit how quickly supply can adjust, raising the possibility that inflation could turn out to be higher and more persistent than we expect. Our new framework for monetary policy emphasizes the importance of having well-anchored inflation expectations, both to foster price stability and to enhance our ability to promote our broad-based and inclusive maximum employment goal. Indicators of longer-term inflation expectations have generally reversed the declines seen earlier in the pandemic and have moved into a range that appears broadly consistent with our longer-run inflation goal of 2%. If we saw signs that the path of inflation or longer-term inflation expectations were moving materially and persistently beyond levels consistent with our goal, we'd be prepared to adjust the stance of monetary policy. The pandemic continues to pose risks to the economic outlook. Progress on vaccinations has limited the spread of COVID-19 and will likely continue to reduce the effects of the public health crisis on the economy. However, the pace of vaccinations has slowed, and new strains of the virus remain a risk. Continued progress on vaccinations will support a return to more normal economic conditions. The Fed's policy actions have been guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people, along with our responsibilities to promote the stability of the financial system. As the committee reiterated in today's policy statement, with inflation having run persistently below 2%, we will aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time so that inflation averages 2% over time, and longer-term inflation expectations remain well anchored at 2%. We expect to maintain an accommodative stance of monetary policy until these employment and inflation outcomes are achieved. With regard to interest rates, we continue to expect that it will be appropriate to maintain the current 0 to 1/4% target range for the federal funds rate until labor market conditions have reached levels consistent with the committee's assessment of maximum employment, and inflation has risen to 2% and is on track to moderately exceed 2% for some time. As is evident in the SEP, many participants forecast that these favorable economic conditions will be met somewhat sooner than previously projected. The median projection for the appropriate level of the federal funds rate now lies above the effective lower bound in 2023. Of course, these projections do not represent a committee decision or plan, and no one knows with any certainty where the economy will be a couple of years from now. More important than any forecast is the fact that whenever liftoff comes, policy will remain highly accommodative. Reaching the conditions for liftoff will mainly signal that the recovery is strong and no longer requires holding rates near zero. In addition, we are continuing to increase our holdings of Treasury securities by at least $80 billion per month and of agency mortgage-backed securities by at least $40 billion per month until substantial further progress has been made toward our maximum employment and price stability goals. The increase in our balance sheet since March 2020 has materially eased financial conditions and is providing substantial support to the economy. At our meeting that concluded earlier today, the committee had a discussion on the progress made toward our goals since the committee adopted its asset purchase guidance last December. While reaching the standard of substantial further progress is still a ways off, participants expect that progress will continue. In coming meetings, the committee will continue to assess the economy's progress toward our goals. As we have said, we will provide advance notice before announcing any decision to make changes to our purchases. On a final note, we made a technical adjustment today to the Federal Reserve's administered rates. The IOER and overnight RRP rates were adjusted upward by 5 basis points in order to keep the federal funds rate well within the target range and to support smooth functioning in money markets. This technical adjustment has no bearing on the appropriate path for the federal funds rate or stance of monetary policy. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to support the economy for as long as it takes to complete the recovery. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
The Washington Post. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Chair Powell, for taking our questions. I'm wondering if you can walk us through expectations you have specifically when it comes to the labor market going into 2023. And I'm curious about people who may have left the labor market, who have yet to come back, or who may face issues with childcare, perhaps they've retired early, any barriers that you see keeping people from the labor market as you consider full employment going into 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would say if you look at the labor market and you look at the demand for workers and the level of job creation and think ahead, I think it's clear, and I am confident that we are on a path to a very strong labor market, a labor market that shows low unemployment, high participation, rising wages for people across the spectrum. I mean, I think that's shown in our projections. It's shown in outside projections. And if you look through the current time frame and think 1 and 2 years out, we're going to be looking at a very, very strong labor market. In terms of exactly what that means, we'll have to see how things evolve. I think we learned during the course of the last very long expansion, the longest in our history, that labor supply during a long expansion can exceed expectations, can move above its estimated trend. And I have no reason to think that that won't happen again. At the same time, we have seen, in terms of participation, we've seen a significant number of people retire. And so we don't actually know exactly what labor force participation will be as we go forward, but I would tend to look at it and think that it can return to high levels, although it may take some time to do that. But overall, this is going to be a very strong labor market. In terms of the near term, you ask as well. So we see a few things that seem likely to be holding back labor supply. There are very large amounts of job openings, and there are a very large number of people who are unemployed, and the pace of filling those jobs somehow feels slower than it might be. So I'd point to a number of things. The first of which is just that most of the act of sort of going back to one's old job, that's kind of already happened. So this is a question of people finding a new job. And that's just a process that takes longer. There may be something of a speed limit on it. You've got to find a job where your skills match what the employer wants. It's got to be in the right area. There's just a lot that goes into the function of finding a job. So that's sort of a natural thing. In addition, I would say that we look at, for example, a significant number of people still say that they're concerned about going back to work in jobs where there's a lot of public facing because of COVID. So that's clearly holding back some people, and that should diminish as vaccinations move ahead. There's also the question of childcare. Many are engaged in caretaking, and as schools reopen and childcare daycare centers open in the fall, or not in the fall, then we should see that supporting labor force participation by caretakers. Finally, unemployment insurance for something like 15 million people will either end or be diminished as we move through the summer and into the fall by the end of September. And I'd like some that may also encourage some to go back in and take jobs. So you would think that would add to an increase in job creation as well. So you put all those together, I would expect that we would see strong job creation building up over the summer and going into the fall. I will also say, though, the last thing I'll say is this is an extraordinarily unusual time, and we really don't have a template or any experience of a situation like this. And so I think we have to be humble about our ability to understand the data. It's not a time to try to reach hard conclusions about the labor market, about inflation, about the path of policy. We need to see more data. We need to be a little bit patient. And I do think, though, that we'll be seeing some things coming up in coming months that will inform our thinking.
Thank you. Paul Kiernan.
Hi, Chairman Powell. Thanks for the question. The committee's medium forecast on inflation seems to assume a pretty tame outlook for the rest of the year. As you know, the 3-month annualized rate for the past 3 months was, I think, 8.4% in the CPI. And I'm just wondering sort of how much longer we can sustain those kinds of rates before you get nervous. Thanks.
So inflation has come in above expectations over the last few months. But if you look behind the headline numbers, you'll see that the incoming data are consistent with the view that the prices that are driving that higher inflation are from categories that are being directly affected by the recovery from the pandemic and the reopening of the economy. So, for example, the experience with lumber prices is illustrative of this. The thought is that prices like that have moved up really quickly because of the shortages and bottlenecks and the like, they should stop going up, and at some point they in some cases should actually go down. And we did see that in the case of lumber. Another example where we haven't seen that yet is prices for used cars, which accounted for more than a third of the total increase in core inflation. Used car prices are going up because of sort of a perfect storm of very strong demand and limited supply. It's going up at just an amazing annual rate. But we do think that it makes sense that that would stop and that, in fact, it would reverse over time. So we think we'll be seeing some of that. When will we be seeing it? We're not sure. That narrative still seems quite likely to prove correct, though, although, you know, as I pointed out at the last press conference, the timing of that is pretty uncertain, and so are the effects in the near term. But over time, it seems likely that these very specific things that are driving up inflation will be temporary. And we'll be on, you know, we'll be looking at the monthly pricing data. I'll also say that the labor market is going to be important both for the maximum employment goal, but also for inflation. And we'll be looking at that. And as I mentioned, we expect, and I expect, that we'll see increases in supply over coming months as the factors that we believe have been suppressing supply abate, wane, move down. So I can't give you an exact number or an exact time, but I would say that we do expect inflation to move down. If you look at the forecasts for 2021 and 2022 and 2023 among my colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee, you'll see that people do expect inflation to move down meaningfully toward our goal. And I think the full range of inflation projections for 2023, it falls between 2 and 2.3%, which is consistent with our goals.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Ilan Mui at CNBC.
Hi, thank you, Chair Powell, for doing this. My question for you is that you mentioned that your colleagues did have a discussion about the progress that you're making toward your goals in order to consider tapering your asset purchases. In that discussion, you said that you haven't made substantial progress yet, but that you expect to continue to make progress. In that discussion, did you guys talk about a timeline for when you expect to see that progress be made and when you might consider starting to reduce those purchases?
Right. So I expect that we'll be able to say more about timing as we see more data. Basically, there's not a lot of more light I can shed on that. But you can think of this meeting that we had as the talking about meeting, if you like. And I now suggest that we retire that term, which has served its purpose well, I think. So committee participants were of the view that since we adopted that guidance in December, the economy has clearly made progress, although we are still a ways from our goal of substantial further progress. Participants expect continued progress ahead toward that objective. And assuming that is the case, it will be appropriate to consider announcing a plan for reducing our asset purchases at a future meeting. So at coming meetings, the committee will continue to assess the economy's progress toward our goals and will give advance notice before announcing any decision. The timing, of course, Ilan, will depend on the pace of that progress and not on any calendar.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Chris Rugaber, AP.
Right, thank you. Well, you mentioned, let me ask about inflation expectations. You said they were, I think you mentioned in your opening statement that you saw them as within target. Does that mean that some of the shorter term measures we've seen out there, such as the New York Federal Reserve's 3-year outlook, which jumped a bit, should those sort of be dismissed? And are we only looking at longer term inflation expectations? And would you describe those as still well anchored at this point? And on a related note, would the Fed consider publishing its index of common inflation expectations on a monthly basis? Thank you.
So we do tend to look at the longer term inflation expectations because that's really, we think, what matters for inflation. The shorter term ones do tend to move around based on, for example, gasoline prices. So you'll see if gasoline prices were to spike, you'll see the shorter-term inflation expectation measures, particularly the surveys, move up, and that's maybe not a good signal for future inflation if gas happens to spike and then go back down again. Yes, I think if you look at the broad range of longer-term inflation expectations, they've moved up. They moved down at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of further exacerbating concerns that we might find ourselves where, for example, the ECB and the Bank of Japan have been, where you have expectations and inflation itself sliding down, and you have a really hard time stopping that process once it begins. So that was a concern. So it's good, actually, to see longer-term inflation expectations move back up to a range. It's a range that's consistent with what our objectives are. These are not precise measures, and they contain risk premiums of various kinds, and that's why we look at a broad range of them and tend to look at the movement of that broad range of indicators, which are from surveys of economists, surveys of the public, and also market-based. It's a wide index, as I'm sure you know. We look at that and we see them back in the range where they were, and they, by the way, they've been broadly higher than that, somewhat modestly higher than that, not so many years ago at a time when inflation was still anchored and at around 2% or maybe even a little bit below. So the answer is yes, I think they are anchored and they're at a good place right now. It's gratifying to see them having moved up off of their pandemic lows. And as you know, it's fundamental in our framework, our new framework, to assure that longer-term inflation expectations are anchored at a place that is consistent with our goal. We think that's an important reason. If inflation expectations are not anchored at a place that's consistent with your goal, it's not clear why you would expect to hit your goal over the longer term. So it's important.
Okay, now we'll go to James Politi with the FT.
Chair Powell. Hi, thanks, Chair Powell. Your economic projections today forecast 7% growth in 2022, unemployment of 4.5%, and core inflation of 3%. If those conditions are achieved by the end of the year, would that constitute substantial further progress in your mind? And kind of more broadly, when you look at the sort of median forecast for interest rates in 2023, showing not one, but two interest rate increases at the time, is this kind of, can you describe the sort of tone of the discussion in the committee? And are we really moving towards sort of a post-pandemic stance? Is there greater confidence that, the recovery will be, a full recovery sooner than expected?
On your first question, the judgment of when we have arrived at substantial further progress is one that the committee will make, and it would not be appropriate for me to lay out particular numbers that do or do not qualify. That is, the process that we're beginning now at the next meeting. We will begin meeting by meeting to assess that progress and talk about what we think we're seeing, and just do all of the things that you do to sort of clarify your thinking around the process of deciding whether and how to adjust the pace and composition of asset purchases. In terms of the two hikes, so let me say a couple things. First of all, not for the first time about the dot plot. These are, of course, individual projections. They're not a committee forecast. They're not a plan. And we did not actually have a discussion of whether liftoff is appropriate at any particular year, because discussing liftoff now would be highly premature. It wouldn't make any sense. In our if you look at the transcripts from 5 years ago, you'll see that sometimes people mention their rate path in their interventions. Often they don't. And the last thing to say is the dots are not a great forecaster of future rate moves, and that's not because it's just because it's so highly uncertain. There is no great forecaster of future dots. So dots to be taken with a big grain of salt. However, so let me talk about this meeting. The committee spelled out, as you know, in our FOMC statements, the conditions that it expects to see before an adjustment in the target range is made. And it's outcome-based, it's not time-based, and as I mentioned, it's labor market conditions consistent with maximum employment, inflation at 2%, and on track to exceed 2%. And the projections, they give some sense of how participants see the economy evolving in their most likely case. And honestly, the main message I would take away from the SEP is that participants, many participants, are more comfortable that the economic conditions in the committee's forward guidance will be met somewhat sooner than previously anticipated. And that would be a welcome development. If such outcomes materialize, it means the economy will have made faster progress toward our goals. So the other thing I'll say is rate increases are really not at all the focus of the committee. The focus of the committee is the current state of the economy, but in terms of our tools, it's about asset purchases. That's what we're thinking about. Liftoff is well into the future. The conditions for liftoff were very far from maximum employment, for example. It's a consideration for the future. So the near-term thing is really, the near-term discussion that will begin is really about the path of asset purchases. And as I mentioned, we had a discussion about that today and expect to, at future meetings, continue to think about our progress.
Thank you. We'll go to Nancy Marshall-Genzer from Marketplace.
Chair Powell, continuing in that vein, when you're ready, how will you go about signaling the start of tapering when you do decide to do that?
So our intention for this process is that it will be orderly, methodical, and transparent. And I can just tell you, we see real value in communicating well in advance what our thinking is, and we'll try to be clear. And as I mentioned, we'll give advance notice before announcing a decision to taper. And so all I can say is that we think it's important. We think where the balance sheet's concerned, a lot of notice, as much transparency as we can give, and as far in advance as we can, to give people a chance to adjust their expectations. And, you know, we expect to be in that business until we reach substantial further progress and then have a decision. Again, I have nothing further on time. It wouldn't be appropriate to say we're going to have to see more data. We're a ways away from substantial further progress, we think, but we're making progress.
So you can't say generally how far in advance you would signal?
Again, as we approach that goal, we'll provide, you know, as much clarity as we can.
Great, thank you. Going to Craig Torres at Bloomberg.
Craig Torres at Bloomberg. If I were a businessman looking at the forecast today, I would ask how and when the Fed seeks to achieve an average of 2% inflation. In other words, does the FOMC have a look-back period, or does it plan to suppress inflation in outer years? Because over the next 3 years, you're going to be above inflation. So what is your look-back period? Does the committee have one? And if not, why not? And if they don't, why isn't this just flexible inflation targeting without an average in a range of 2 to 2.25%? Thanks.
You know, so as part of our 1.5 year long process, the review that we did and came out with at the end of that with the new statement on longer run goals and monetary policy strategy, we looked carefully at the idea. We've all read all of the literature around different formulas for makeup and things like that. And we concluded, and I strongly agree, that it's not wise to wed yourself to a particular formulation of that. So we did adopt a discretionary. There's an element of discretion in it. You know, it says that we will seek inflation that runs moderately above 2% for some time, and it's meant to create a broad sense that we want inflation to average 2% over time, and that under the old formula, under the old framework. What was happening was 2% was a ceiling because all of the errors were below. You were always getting back to 2%, so you were bouncing back and forth between 1.5 and 2, and we wanted them to be centered around 2. So that's the approach that we're taking. You're right. It's not a formula-like approach. We were clear on that when we announced the framework. Was there another part of your question, Craig?
That pretty much answers it, Chair Powell. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Michael Derby.
Thanks for taking my question. So I wanted to ask you about the reverse repo usage that we've seen lately. I was curious if you are at all concerned about the level of money flowing into the reverse repo facility, and do you believe that the changes in the Fed's rate control toolkit today will have any impact on that? And then in a related question, do you think that Fed asset purchases are taking too many safe assets out of the market right now and creating maybe some dislocations in the money markets?
So on the facility, we think it's doing its job. We think it's doing the reverse repo facility is doing what it's supposed to do, which is to provide a floor under money market rates and keep the federal funds rate well within its range. So we're not concerned with it. It's doing. You have an unusual situation where the Treasury General account is shrinking and bill supply is shrinking, and so there's downward pressure. We're buying assets. There's downward pressure on short-term rates, and that facility is doing what we think it's supposed to do. Sorry, your second question was again?
Yeah, I mean, the change in the rate control toolkit, will that have any impact on, do you think that will reduce the amount of money coming into reverse repos? Will that have any impact on money market conditions that, beyond the Fed funds rate setting?
It could have some impact. I think we'll have to see empirically, but it's designed to keep the federal funds rate within the range, and I do think it could have some effect on broader money market conditions below, as it relates to the very low rates and the downward pressures.
Okay. And do you think it will lower uptake on the reverse repo facility, or that's just not even really a focus of what the change was?
It's not. It's honestly, and the funny thing, you would think that it would, but we'll have to see. It's possible that would not be the case. Well, that's going to be an empirical question.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We'll go to Gina Smialek at the New York Times.
Hey, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. I was wondering if you could follow up a little bit on your response to Rachel at the very beginning and talk a little bit about how we should understand what full employment means in a world that, as you mentioned, is pretty roiled. All the data has been pretty roiled by the pandemic, and we're not really sure where EPOP is going to settle in. We're not sure where participation is going to settle in, and wages are already looking, decent. So I guess I wonder what full employment means in this context and sort of how you're thinking about those wage data.
Yeah, as you well know, there isn't one indicator we can look to, and there's no one number that we can therefore point to. We look at a range of indicators, and it's a very broad range. You can count to a high number just quickly, but certainly it will include things like unemployment and participation and wages and many different flavors of that. So how do we think about it? A couple things. We're all going to be informed by what we saw in the last cycle, which was labor supply outperforming expectations over a long period of time. Now, that hadn't happened in many other cycles, but this was a very long cycle. So we're going to have to be alert to see whether that can happen again. It's a different economy. We have had a slew of retirements, and that may weigh on participation. That effect, though, should wear off in a few years, and as you move through that window, because people would have retired anyway, and you'll be back where you would have been. So I think the lesson number one is just to be careful about assessing maximum employment, and I think during the last cycle there were waves of concern that we were reaching full employment as early as 2012 when I arrived at the Fed, and 8 years later, we were still creating jobs, and it was quite remarkable. So we're all going to be informed by that. At the same time, we understand this is a different economy. The demographics people are getting older, and that should have a secular effect of reducing participation over time. So we have to be sensible about what can be done. But I think we're going to lean into that and be optimistic. You asked about wages. we're seeing wage increases. That's sort of a natural thing to be seeing in a strong economy. And what we're seeing is that we don't see anything that's troubling in the sense of what would be troubling would be, very wide across the economy, wages at unsustainable levels without high inflation. In other words, wages in excess of productivity and inflation by a meaningful amount broadly across the economy, sort of forcing companies to keep raising prices and getting into a wage price cycle. That's the old formula for one of the old formulas for having high inflation. We don't see anything like that now. We do see high wages. We see them for people who are mostly new, entering into new jobs, many of them in low-skilled jobs. And but we do think you've got a thing in the labor market right now where supply and demand are just not matched up well. And we think it's a flexible economy, and it will clear. There will be a level at which supply and demand meet, and we think that'll be happening in coming months. So, but the last thing I'll say is, again, if you look at the forecasts, we're going to be in a very strong labor market pretty quickly here. There's still a big group of unemployed people, and we're not going to forget about them. We're going to do everything we can to get people back into work and give them the chance to work. But there's every reason to think that we'll be in a labor market with very attractive numbers, with low unemployment, high participation, and rising wages across the spectrum. So that's a little bit how we're looking at the labor market.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Hannah Lang at the American Banker.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the status of your thinking around the supplementary leverage ratio right now. Is the Fed still thinking about ways to permanently adjust this to account for the high growth in deposits? And do you ultimately believe a permanent fix is needed? And any information on the timing around that would be helpful.
I can say is we're working on it. Don't have anything to share with you in terms of the particulars or the timing right now, unfortunately, but we've always, our position has been for a long time, and it is now that we like the leverage ratio to be a backstop to risk-based capital requirements. When leverage requirements are binding, it does skew incentives for firms to substitute low-risk assets for high-risk ones. It's a straightforward thing. And because of the substantial increase in reserves, treasuries, and other safe assets in the banking system, the SLR is rapidly ceasing to be the intended backstop for our big firms that we want it to be. So we do think it's appropriate to consider ways to adapt it to this new high reserves environment, and we're looking hard at the issue. We would also, just to be really clear, we will take whatever actions are necessary to assure that any changes we do make or recommend do not erode the overall strength of bank capital requirements. Sorry, I can't give you any more. That's just something we're working on.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Anakin Tappet at CNN Business.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. Chairman Powell, the price jumps we've seen in some raw materials, lumber, for example, you mentioned it earlier, seem to be easing, and it looks like we're at the beginning of suppliers catching up with demand. But I wonder if you're worried at all if we're going to end up with excess supply immediately after those shortages were off, and if we just continue this mismatch as we're recovering and getting out of the pandemic economy. And I wonder how that would affect the Fed's outlook at all.
Well, that is really not the problem we're having right now. But actually, people who work in commodity industries are very focused on that because they know that they don't want to build capacity and then find out that it's not necessary. So really, the problem now is that demand is very, very strong. Incomes are high. People have money on their in the bank accounts. Demand for goods is extremely high, and it hasn't come down. We're seeing the service sector reopening, and so you're seeing prices are moving back up off their lows there. But in terms of overcorrecting, I mean, I think there is a possibility on the other side of this that inflation could actually be quite low going forward. But that's not really where our focus is right now. Our focus right now is we need to. Our expectation is that these these high inflation readings that we're seeing now will start to abate. And that's what we think. And it'll be like the lumber experience and like we expect the used car experience to be, with things like airplane tickets and hotels, which are the other two factors in the most recent CPI report that went up a lot. We expect that those prices will get back up to where they were, but there's no reason to think that they're going to keep going up a lot. Because if they are, people will build new hotels. There's no reason for supply and demand to be out of whack in the hotel business over any period of time. So we think that'll happen. I think in terms of the timing and the effects on inflation in the near term, there's a lot of uncertainty. The overall story is one that we think is right, and we think the incoming data support it. And so do many forecasters. And if you look at the forecasts on the FOMC, you will see that as well. But we don't in any way dismiss the chance that it can work out that this goes on longer than expected, and the risk would be that over time it does begin to affect inflation expectations. And if we see inflation expectations and inflation or inflation moving up in a way that is really materially above what we would see as consistent with our goals, and persistently so, we wouldn't hesitate to use our tools to address that. Price stability is half of our mandate, and we would certainly do that. We do not expect that, though. That is not our base case, and in that we're joined by many other forecasters. But there's a lot to be humble about among forecasters. Forecasters have a lot to be humble about. It's a highly uncertain business, and we're very much attuned